The city never truly slept, but it had moments where it softened, early morning just before the sun cracked open the skyline, or late at night when the wind cut through the steel and glass canyons of downtown and wrapped around street lamps like a whisper. Marcus had always liked those hours. They reminded him of the life he'd built from the silence, not from applause. The world never clapped when he was broke, building software on borrowed Wi-Fi in laundromats. It only started clapping when the headlines printed numbers. But even after the app, after the buyout, after the digits in his bank account grew longer than his email signature, Marcus still walked with the posture of someone unseen. He found power in silence, in slipping through spaces without permission and watching the way people filled them when they didn't think anyone important was looking. That's why he didn't enter the restaurant again for 2 weeks. He let it breathe. He let it operate under the illusion that it had passed, that the incident was nothing more than another anonymous delivery. He monitored reports, tracked performance metrics, and watched security footage remotely. He read the emails, the ones about client experience, the ones masking cold hierarchy in cheerful corporate vocabulary. They said all the right things and missed all the real ones. So he waited. And while he waited, he watched the city change around him. Developers paved over soul to build glass towers. Coffee shops charged extra to smile. People started calling loyalty user retention. The very same culture he had tried to fund was now being diluted into something else, something measurable but meaningless. He drove past the restaurant more than once, always alone, never stopping. Each time, the valet looked through him. The front desk rotated hosts, each one trained to be efficient, attractive, distant. None of them knew that the man in the rain-damp coat watching them from across the street could have replaced them in a breath. But Marcus didn't want to replace. Not yet. He wanted to understand. He remembered when the original pitch deck came across his desk. It wasn't fancy. The chef had no PR team. Just a dream and a spreadsheet filled with naive hope. But it was honest. Marcus had seen something rare in that presentation: sincerity. A desire to build a space that wasn't just another high-end facade, but something real. Food that felt like memory. Walls that felt like conversation. A place for everyone. The restaurant had promised to reflect the city. All of it. Not just the curated parts. And Marcus had believed it. Now he was watching that promise rot under linen napkins and overpriced entrees, and he realized that money could only build a skeleton. Culture had to be grown, and it wasn't growing here anymore. One night, he returned, not in disguise, not as a customer, but as himself. He entered through the front. Not dramatically. Just with presence. The host didn't recognize him. Why would he? No one ever bothered to look twice at a man in a plain coat with quiet eyes. The host asked if he had a reservation. Marcus gave him a name, one from the ownership documents. The one that should have made bells ring. It didn't. The host scanned the list, paused, then gave a shallow nod and motioned him to wait. Marcus didn't move. He stood there and watched. The bar was full. The dining room buzzed. Plates clattered softly beneath the drone of muted conversation. And in all of it, the shimmer of cutlery, the glow of candlelight, not a single person looked like they worked in the back. He knew the numbers. Knew the diversity ratios. Knew that the line cooks, dishwashers, and janitorial staff came from the city's edges: bus rides, train transfers, night shifts. The real machine that ran this restaurant was invisible intentionally. Every smiling server and tailored bartender was framed like a museum piece, handpicked to fit the image. The host called his name again, this time with urgency. Marcus walked past him and toward the back. There was hesitation. A step forward. A question forming. Then silence. No one stopped him. In the kitchen, the heat hit him like memory. Sizzling pans, barked instructions, tickets fluttering in the air like leaves in a storm. For a moment, he stood still, not as owner, not as investor, just as witness. The chef was plating something with precision but no joy. The staff moved in lines, not rhythm. This wasn't art. This was automation with aprons. He looked to the shelf near the pass. A small plaque once stood there, a quote about community. It was gone, replaced by a seasonal wine list. That was when he knew. Not suspected. Not feared. Knew. They had lost the soul. The restaurant had become a brand, not a place. An idea of excellence, not the experience of it. And Marcus had funded it. Nurtured it. Protected it. Only to watch it turn into the very thing it had promised to resist. He walked back out the way he came. No one noticed. And that was the final failure. Because no one ever notices the delivery guy. Even when he's the one signing their checks. There was something poetic about blueprints. They didn't lie. They couldn't. You looked at a blueprint and it showed you everything: the wiring, the beams, the hollow spaces hidden behind drywall. the map of a structure's soul. Marcus had studied hundreds over the years. Not just buildings, but businesses, people, power structures. He could read a spreadsheet like a crime scene. He could see the cracks in a company's foundation long before anyone else noticed the sag in the roof. He didn't just invest in restaurants, he studied them. Learned their psychology. He knew how floor layout affected movement, how lighting altered behavior, how table spacing could subtly imply whether a guest was welcome to stay or expected to leave quickly. He knew which placement of kitchen doors led to smoother service and which placement increased stress and turnover. He understood margins, but he also understood morale. And more than anything, he understood silence. The kind of silence that hides in polished reports. The silence of fake smiles and backhanded compliments. The silence that comes when people who look like him enter spaces that were never designed for them, even if they helped pay for the lights to stay on. Marcus had built an empire not by talking, but by watching. By understanding what moved people. By seeing what others refused to. And what he had seen at the restaurant that night, the way the staff ignored him, the way the customers were curated, the way the kitchen pulsed like a machine with no heart, told him everything. It wasn't about one bad manager. It wasn't about a snobby host. It was about rot in the foundation. He didn't blame them for forgetting who he was. He had made it easy to forget. He never put his name on plaques. Never gave speeches. Never showed up at ribbon cuttings. He believed in letting the work speak. But when the work stopped speaking, when the building began whispering lies, he knew it was time to return. Not as a visitor. Not as a mystery guest. But as the man who had memorized the blueprints. Marcus spent the next several days reviewing everything, every policy, every financial record, every anonymous staff complaint routed through the feedback portal his team had set up in the early days. Most were ignored. Some were answered with canned HR replies. A few had been deleted entirely. But they still lived in the system. Nothing on a server truly vanishes. The pattern was clear. Downstairs, the staff turned over at twice the rate of the front. Back-of-house roles had grown more volatile. A dishwasher had been fired for allegedly stealing leftovers, but the report filed had no witness names. A cook had been reprimanded for disruptive behavior after suggesting a cheaper supplier for produce. The chef had written him up, claiming it wasn't his place to suggest changes. And then there were the guests. Marcus found archived footage of an incident where a young black couple had been turned away despite available tables. The host claimed they were at capacity, yet 3 groups were seated within minutes of their departure. He compared it with reservation logs. The names were mismatched. The timestamps off. It wasn't a glitch. It was a filter. The restaurant had become an exclusive club, unintentionally or not, with an unspoken membership requirement. Look like money. Walk like privilege. And always come through the front door with the right armor, status, style, silence. He thought back to the original pitch. The chef had spoken about heritage, how food connects generations, how flavors tell the stories of cities and struggle and survival. How they wanted to build a place where anyone could taste not just fusion cuisine, but fusion culture. Something that honored the past while innovating the future. It had started with hope. And it had ended in mimicry. Marcus didn't rage. That was never his style. He operated like an architect with a scalpel, not a wrecking ball. He didn't want destruction. He wanted truth. And to reveal the truth, he needed to build something they couldn't ignore. He called his assistant and requested a list of all upcoming vendor contracts. Linen suppliers. Produce partners. Beverage distributors. He wanted to review each one, not for cost, but for values. Which vendors hired from the local community? Which ones had equity policies in place? Which ones were quietly running the same games this restaurant had become? Because a building wasn't just beams and bricks. It was decisions. And Marcus was about to change every single one. It started with an email. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft ping into the inboxes of every department head at the restaurant. Subject line, revisions to ownership agreements and strategic review. Nothing threatening. Nothing unusual. Except for the sender, Marcus Devane. To most of them, the name meant little. They assumed it was another consultant, a finance auditor, maybe someone from the parent company doing a quarterly sweep. The general manager raised an eyebrow. The executive chef rolled his eyes. The operations lead skimmed it between invoices and forgot about it. But the few who paid attention, the ones with long memories or access to early investor documents, stopped breathing for a moment. Marcus Devane wasn't just an analyst. He wasn't just a consultant. He was the first name on the first check. The man behind the money. The one who made it possible for them to exist. And the one who hadn't shown his face, not publicly, not officially, since the deal was signed. Until now. The email was followed by a scheduling request, a full team meeting in 3 days. Mandatory. In person. Marcus would attend. The chef protested privately. Said he had too much prep. The GM asked if they could reschedule. There were influencers coming in that night and the optics mattered. But the meeting didn't move. The time was fixed. The calendar invite locked. And slowly, a sense of unease began to creep through the walls. Marcus spent those 3 days not preparing slides, not writing speeches, but observing. He visited the restaurant each night in silence. Dressed like he had always dressed, simple, comfortable, unremarkable. Each time, he entered without announcement. Sat at the bar. Took notes. He watched as staff ignored patrons who didn't fit the brand. He watched a Latino delivery worker be told to use the back door even though the front was wide open. He watched a black couple seated near the kitchen while louder, flashier guests were given tables with views. The patterns weren't just structural. They were systemic. And Marcus understood systems better than anyone. On the day of the meeting, the team gathered in the private dining room. It was the space they used for VIPs, the $200 plate tasting menu guests, the lifestyle bloggers, the sponsors. No one in that room expected to be on the receiving end of scrutiny. They were the ones who set standards, who curated culture, who smiled when it mattered and whispered when it didn't. Until Marcus walked in. Not dressed in a suit. Not carrying a laptop or leather folder. Just himself. No one spoke. He took a seat at the head of the table not because he claimed it, but because the room rearranged itself around his presence. He placed a manila envelope on the table. Inside were transcripts, video stills, audio logs, customer reviews, employee complaints, and exit interviews. None of it doctored. None of it exaggerated. Just the truth. He opened the envelope. Slowly. Deliberately. And the storm began. The room didn't crumble with shouting. It didn't explode with denial. It simply stalled. Frozen in a tension so dense it pressed against the windows. Every face at that long table, once confident and curated, now carried the brittle stiffness of people cornered by truth they hadn't prepared to confront. They sat upright, but their eyes wandered, to the envelope, to the man seated at the head of the table, to one another. No one moved, and Marcus didn't fill the silence. He let it sit, let it stretch until every second throbbed in the ears of those who had once dismissed him with a glance. Then, one by one, the papers came out. Employee surveys ignored. Customer reviews manually deleted. Video stills, time-stamped, cross-referenced, undeniable. A photo of the hostess laughing as she pointed a guest to the back, unaware of the camera in the corner. A comment from a dismissed waiter about racial jokes in the kitchen. An internal memo where a manager questioned whether too many casual guests were hurting the restaurant's elevated appeal. They were artifacts, not accusations. Marcus didn't accuse. He exposed. And no one in that room could look away anymore. The chef, once so vocal, now stared at a single page like it was a death sentence. The general manager kept shifting in his seat, trying to find footing in a conversation that had never begun. The operations director opened his mouth twice and closed it without sound. And the marketing lead, the only one brave or foolish enough to speak, said something about brand perception and public interpretation. But her words died somewhere under Marcus's gaze. Because he didn't come for spin. He came for restoration. The restaurant wasn't just a business to him. It was a symbol, an idea that places could be better. That success didn't have to come at the cost of dignity. That food, the universal language, could be served without a side dish of judgment. But they had poisoned it. Quietly, systemically, not with violence but with neglect. Not by saying the wrong thing but by saying nothing at all when others did. Marcus reached into the envelope again and pulled out one final item. It was a photograph. Grainy. Nighttime. A delivery driver, hoodie soaked through, standing at the kitchen door. No one opening it. No one greeting him. Just a man, waiting, forgotten in the cold. It was him. No one recognized it at first. But slowly, the realization settled like dust. He had been there, watching, measuring, evaluating, not for revenge, for choice. He stood now, slowly, deliberately, and placed the photo on the center of the table. Then, without a single word, he turned and walked out. He didn't need a speech. He was the storm. And now the silence belonged to them. It took 48 hours for the aftershocks to ripple through the building. They didn't arrive as sirens or ultimatums. They came in the quiet rewiring of everything beneath the surface. The kind of rewiring only someone who had built the structure from its earliest frame could orchestrate without raising a voice. The first change was invisible. Access. Keycards stopped working. Passwords were reset. Dashboards that once showed filtered data now displayed everything. Unedited, unsanitized, raw. Managers opened their daily reports to find labor schedules restructured for balance, not optics. The color-coded ratings from preferred guests were replaced by anonymized notes about service consistency and inclusion. The security feed, once managed by third-party contractors, was routed directly to a small encrypted server only Marcus controlled. He watched everything, not to control, to correct. The second change came in sound. The quiet disappearance of certain names. One by one, the most toxic voices vanished. The manager who casually joked about cheap customers. The bartender who refused to serve guests who didn't look elevated. The floor lead who graded servers by how presentable they were. No firings were public. No dramatic outbursts. Just meetings that ended with final paychecks and NDAs. Some tried to protest. But there was no one to protest to. Because Marcus didn't hold town halls. He didn't call for consensus. He simply rewrote the code. The third change was cultural. And it moved slow like heat crawling across cold metal. New hires began to arrive. Not because they fit a look, but because they brought something different. A former line cook who had taken time off to care for his mother. A black pastry chef with no culinary school diploma but 10 years of soul in his hands. A teenage hostess who stuttered but made every guest feel heard. They weren't flashy. They weren't curated. But they were real. And the guests noticed. Not right away. Not in headlines. But in the small ways that matter. In how they were greeted. In how the food tasted warmer even if it was the same recipe. In how the silence of elitism had been replaced with the hum of genuine welcome. Marcus visited again. Not through the back. Not unannounced. He walked in through the front door, past the new host, a young man who smiled not because he was trained to, but because he meant it. The man greeted Marcus like he was anyone. Not the investor. Not the boss. Just another guest. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus smiled. He sat at the bar, ordered the same dish from weeks ago, the one served cold with a cold stare, and this time it arrived warm, plated with intention, and placed gently before him by a server who asked nothing of him but to enjoy it. No fawning. No theater. Just respect. He looked around. The air had changed. It no longer clung to the walls like a performance. It breathed. The restaurant was healing. Not because he demanded it, but because he quietly proved that the most powerful correction doesn't come from rage, it comes from structure. And now that structure stood firm, wrapped in new hands, new hearts, and the kind of quiet fire only real consequence leaves behind. Weeks became months and the restaurant no longer spoke in the same dialect. Where there had once been unspoken hierarchies and curated coldness, now there were glances of collaboration, shared energy, and a soft pulse of something truer. Not perfect, but breathing. Alive. The menus still held the same dishes. The walls still echoed with music and clinking glass. But something deeper had shifted. And Marcus saw it in the smallest of things, in how a dishwasher was asked for his input on waste systems, in how the new sous chef explained flavor not as technique, but as memory. He saw it in how no one rushed to impress him anymore. They served him because they served everyone with intention. He still arrived unannounced from time to time, walking in with the same quiet rhythm, same hoodie, same sneakers. But now the staff greeted him the same way they greeted every guest, with welcome, not wariness. They no longer made assumptions. They didn't see a delivery guy, or an executive, or a stranger. They saw a person. That was the whole point. And Marcus, for the first time, allowed himself to linger. He sat near the back one evening, watching the room as it moved without stiffness, without pretending. The guests were diverse, not just in color, but in language, background, expression. A table of artists. A family from the neighborhood. A couple on their first date who couldn't afford the wine pairing but still received the same service as anyone else. He remembered the very first meeting. The promise the chef had made to build a space that honored the entire city, not just its elite. The chef was gone now, stepped down gracefully or perhaps ashamedly after realizing what he had allowed the place to become. But Marcus didn't resent him. Some people were visionaries without endurance. Some had fire but no fuel. And some, like Marcus, understood that buildings and people needed foundations that weren't just financial. They needed conviction. The restaurant was no longer trying to impress anyone. It was trying to mean something. And it did. Not because it wore new uniforms or ran better ads, but because it told the truth now, not through statements, but through action. Later that night, as the final guests left and chairs were tucked beneath polished tables, Marcus walked toward the kitchen one last time. The new manager, a woman who had started as a server and risen through respect, not politics, looked up and nodded. He nodded back. No meeting. No ceremony. No final word. He stepped out into the night, the chill brushing his collar, and kept walking. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message about another venture, another opportunity. He ignored it for now. Because the story didn't need a sequel. It needed space. Space for the building to stand on its own. He had done what he came to do, not just as an investor, not just as a founder, but as someone who knew what it meant to be unseen, unheard, underestimated. And in the end, the greatest investment he made wasn't in food. It was in culture, in memory, in dignity. And as he disappeared into the blur of streetlight and silence, no one chased him. No one snapped photos. No one asked for credit. Because that's how he built everything. Quietly, completely, and absolutely undeniable.